Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was supposed to be a simple favor. My best friend, Sarah, asked me to house sit for her while she was away on a business trip. She lived in a large, isolated farmhouse in the country, surrounded by fields and forests. I had visited a few times before, and though the house was old and creaky, it had a charm to it. So when she asked, I agreed without hesitation. The first night, everything seemed normal. I fed her dog Molly, let her outside, and settled in with a book by the fire. The house was quiet, peaceful even. But that evening, as I was about to go to bed, I noticed something strange. The mirrors, they all had fingerprints on them, not just smudges, but clear, distinct handprints. They were on every mirror, bathroom, hallway, even the large mirror in the living room. I was puzzled. Had Sarah's dog somehow done that? It seemed odd, but I shrugged it off. I wiped them down and went to bed. But as the night went on, things only grew stranger. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a soft, almost inaudible tapping on my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe a tree branch brushing against the glass. But when I got out of bed and looked, I saw something I couldn't explain. A face. Pressed against the window was a pale, distorted face, its eyes wide and unblinking, staring right at me. My heart stopped, and I stumbled back, nearly falling over in the dark. I rushed to the window, but when I looked outside, there was nothing there. No one. Just the empty field and the darkness. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. The night was still. The air was cold, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave. The next day, I cleaned the house and checked the mirrors again. The handprints were gone. In their place, a new mark had appeared. Deep gouges, as if something had scraped across the glass from the inside. The marks were so precise, so deliberate, it made my skin crawl. That night, I locked all the doors and windows and decided to stay awake. I kept Molly in the room with me for comfort. But around 3 a.m., I heard something I couldn't ignore, a soft scratching coming from behind the walls. It wasn't the house settling, it was movement. Something was there, something moving just beyond the plaster. I grabbed my phone and texted Sarah. She replied with a simple, cryptic message. "It's coming back. Don't let it in." What did that mean? I tried to call her, but she didn't pick up. The scratching grew louder, then stopped suddenly, as if whatever it was had gotten tired of hiding. I didn't sleep that night. The following morning, I hurriedly packed my things and tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled or pushed, it was stuck, as if something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic set in. Molly started barking, growling at something in the corner of the room. Her fur stood on end. I backed away from the door, my eyes scanning the room. Then I saw it, the mirror. It was no longer reflecting the room. It reflected the dark hallway behind me, but in the reflection, the hallway was not empty. A shadow moved, twisting in the corner, growing larger as it approached. I screamed, grabbed Molly, and ran to the back door. It was the same. Stuck. I was trapped. I finally managed to force it open, but when I stepped outside, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the distance, across the field, there was a figure standing. A tall, thin shape staring at me with hollow eyes. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, where I begged them to let me in. The next day, I contacted Sarah again, telling her everything that had happened. She didn't respond. Instead, I received a strange message from her voicemail. "It's not over yet. You have to leave the house. It knows you're still there." I never went back. I haven't heard from Sarah since. Every time I close my eyes, I see that face in the window, and I hear the scratching from behind the wall.
Story number 2.
I was 19 when I decided to take a weekend job house sitting for an elderly couple who lived near the edge of town. They had a beautiful, sprawling estate, nestled in a dense patch of woods. I had met them a few times through my parents, and they were kind people. So when they asked me to stay at their house while they visited family, I agreed. The first night went smoothly. I fed their dogs, checked the windows, and locked up before settling into the large, dimly lit living room to watch some TV. The house was quiet, too quiet, but that was nothing new for a large, secluded place like this. The air was heavy with the smell of old wood and dust. Around midnight, I decided to go upstairs to bed. As I walked up the stairs, I felt something brush against my leg. I turned around, expecting one of the dogs to have followed me up, but they were nowhere to be found. I assumed I had just imagined it, so I continued to my room. I tried to fall asleep, but the air felt thick, suffocating. It wasn't until I started hearing the soft thud, thud, thud from below that my anxiety kicked in. The sounds weren't loud, just soft and methodical, like footsteps in the distance. I lay in bed, frozen, listening as the thuds grew louder. Someone was downstairs. I grabbed my phone and texted the couple, asking if they were home yet. No response. Then I called them. Straight to voicemail. The footsteps continued, now almost at the foot of the stairs. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Finally, I mustered the courage to check. I tiptoed to the top of the stairs and peered down. The hallway light was on. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. It was too heavy to be one of the dogs. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I reached out for the light switch and flicked it on. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a figure standing in the hallway. Tall, slender, and hunched at an impossible angle, as if it was trying to fit through a door that was too small for it. Its head was tilted, almost upside down, and it was staring straight at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Its skin was pale, almost sickly, and stretched tight over its face. I screamed and backed up into the hallway, but when I turned, I ran directly into one of the dogs. It barked and wagged its tail, seemingly unbothered by the figure downstairs. I blinked, confused. When I looked back, the figure was gone. Shaking, I made my way downstairs, checked every room, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone. The dogs were sound asleep, and the house was eerily quiet again. The next morning, I told the couple what had happened, but they just looked at me strangely. They assured me that the house was old, full of settling noises. "Don't worry," they said. "It's probably just a trick of the mind." But when I went to leave, the elderly woman pulled me aside. "You're sure you weren't followed?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Followed?" I repeated, confused. "Something happened here years ago," she whispered, looking over her shoulder. "We've been trying to forget. You're the first one to stay here alone since the incident." I never asked for more details. All I know is that when I left that house, I felt like something was still watching me. And to this day, whenever I pass by that area of town, I swear I can see something in the trees. Just a glimpse of pale skin, twisted in a way that shouldn't be possible. I still don't know what it was, but I know I never want to go back.
Story number 3.
I was a college student, living in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of town. It was a cozy place, the kind you'd expect a student to live in, bare with a few mismatched pieces of furniture and a cluttered kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That is, until one night, I started hearing things. At first it was subtle, small noises in the walls, scratching sounds that I chalked up to old pipes or rodents. The kind of noises you just ignore because you don't want to deal with them. But over time, it escalated. I'd be lying in bed trying to sleep when I'd hear it, a faint tapping, not on the walls, but on the window. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone was lightly drumming their fingers against the glass. I lived on the second floor, so there was no way anyone could be outside tapping. It didn't make sense. But every night, like clockwork, it would start. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was just the wind or maybe a branch scraping against the window. But as the nights passed, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes it would be quick, other times slow and methodical, but it was always there, always. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and stood in front of the window, determined to find out what was causing it. The apartment was silent. No wind, no trees near my window. I shone the flashlight outside, sweeping it across the empty yard and the distant streetlight. Nothing. But then I saw it. A figure standing under the street lamp, just beyond the reach of the light. It was tall, unnaturally so, and the more I stared, the more I realized how wrong it looked. Its limbs were long and crooked, its body bent at strange angles, like it was a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tightly. And its face was wrong. It was pale and hollow, with eyes that looked like deep, dark holes, and a mouth that stretched far too wide, almost unnaturally so. I froze, heart racing. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring up at me. Then, without warning, it tilted its head at an impossible angle as if acknowledging my gaze. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over my own feet. My breath caught in my throat. The tapping had stopped, but now I could hear something else, soft, deliberate footsteps pacing around outside the building. It was like the thing knew I was watching. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for several nights after that. Each time I would look out the window, the figure would be there, always in the same spot, watching me. Sometimes it would be just standing, sometimes moving in jerky, twitching motions, but it was always there. I tried to talk to my neighbors, but no one else seemed to hear the tapping or see the figure. They thought I was imagining things, probably stressed from school. But I knew what I saw. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things and left. The day I moved out, I drove by the apartment one last time, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in the window. A pale face staring out at me. I haven't gone back to that area of town since, and I'll never forget the way it tilted its head, as like it was waiting for me to make the first move.
Story number 4.
I had just moved to a new city for my job and was struggling to find a place. The only option left within my budget was a small old apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The landlord was strange, but friendly enough, and after a brief tour, I signed the lease. The apartment was cramped, with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors, but I didn't mind. I was just glad to have a roof over my head. The first few days were uneventful. It wasn't until I started noticing the oddities that things began to take a dark turn. It started with the lights. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find the kitchen light on, or sometimes the bathroom light flickering. The first time I thought it was a mistake on my part. Maybe I had forgotten to turn them off before bed. But then it kept happening. I would go to sleep, and every morning, a light would be on that I hadn't left on. I shrugged it off as the building's old wiring, but then I started hearing noises at night. Soft, barely audible scraping sounds. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, but it was always in the same place, behind the walls, near the kitchen. Sometimes it sounded like fingernails dragging along the surface. One evening, I decided to stay up and figure out what was causing it. I locked all the windows, checked every door, and settled into the living room, trying to focus on my work. As the hours passed, I started to hear it again, the scratching. I couldn't tell where it was coming from exactly, but it was clear that it was inside the walls. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the kitchen, shining it along the walls, expecting to find some kind of rodent or bug. But when I shone the light near the stove, I saw something I didn't expect. There, etched into the wall, were words. "Get out!" The handwriting was sloppy, jagged, as if someone had scraped the words into the wall with something sharp. My stomach turned. I ran my fingers over the letters, and to my horror, they felt fresh, as though they had been carved recently. I backed away, my heart pounding, and the scraping sound grew louder, almost like something was scratching in the walls, moving closer. I couldn't leave fast enough. I rushed out of the apartment and down the stairs, but when I reached the front door, the landlord was standing in the hallway, his face pale, his eyes wide. "I thought I told you," he said, his voice shaking. "You shouldn't have moved in." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, yellowed key. "You weren't supposed to see it. It wasn't meant for anyone else. I thought it was safe now, but it's never really gone." Before I could ask what he meant, he handed me the key. "You need to leave. Don't come back here." I didn't ask any more questions. I took the key, and without saying another word, I left. I never went back to that apartment. And to this day, I wonder what the landlord meant. Who was in those walls? What had been there before me? I still sometimes hear scratching when I'm alone, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that apartment is still out there, waiting.